There's sexy danger, sexy bad choices, probably more sexy danger.
I can't remember the last time I played a game where the developer absolutely nailed the most crucial aspect while managing to completely shit the bed everywhere else. Anthem has incredibly fun combat most of the time, which should be the foundation for a great game, or at least a decent one. Yet some of the missteps are so unbelievably basic, so obviously a bad idea, that you just know there were huge issues behind the scenes. There will undoubtedly be documentaries on the making of Anthem one day. The core of Anthem's problems can probably be traced back to an EA conference room and a PowerPoint presentation. I can picture it. Lots of senior executives in suits, some of the more trendy ones will forgo the tie and maybe even roll their sleeves up if it's a Friday, but you know the drill. They flick through the slides which break down how Destiny makes money for Activision and keeps players engaged, which in turn makes them more money. Knowing EA, there are checkboxes of things that need to be in the game with no real thought put into it. The executives know you need daily quests to keep people logging in, but don't know what makes a daily quest fun or worthwhile, they just want the box ticked. EA then selected Bioware as the developer to make the revenue generating product in question. I suspect Bioware was already working on Anthem and EA just thought it would be a good fit for the formula its executives just came up with. What with Bioware already having experience with sci-fi games and even a space MMO. Things changed over the years since this meeting definitely happened. I doubt microtransactions were limited to cosmetics initially, for example, but on that day Anthem's fate was largely set. Or was it? This is probably where you expect the big anti-EA rant or a general whinge about the state of the industry in 2019, but you know what, this isn't the place. I do hate the way big budget games are going. I can't stand microtransactions, I despise loot boxes, and I'm suspicious of most products EA puts out. It sucks that live services and continued revenue streams are put before making games that are actually good and finished, but that's a bigger market issue. It's the reason I might avoid a game entirely, but if I am going to review a game, I'll do my best to judge the game on its merits, separate from other considerations. Anthem doesn't deserve to bear the brunt of an industry-wide problem. Besides, I do enough complaining about this stuff already on Twitter. Anyway, it's not entirely EA's fault. EA greenlit production, however it was on Bioware to make Anthem, and it's Bioware that needs to take responsibility for the eventual mess that is Anthem. Anthem isn't a game made by committee, it was designed by committee, but made by Bioware. If EA is to blame for anything, it's for likely forcing Anthem to be released in such an incomplete state, because it is far from finished. Just clearing up the bugs looks like a good 6 months worth of extra work at least, and that's not even considering the plethora of other issues that are fundamental to the nature of the game that aren't bugs, they're just signs of a rushed development process, or to be blunt, a team that simply didn't have the skill set for the task at hand. As you've likely guessed, this video will be incredibly negative on Anthem. Look, it's only fair. I didn't play Fallout 76, so when every other YouTuber was raking in the views around that game's release with their angry rants, I had to miss out. I need to get this out of my system. But there's a catch. I don't hate Anthem. I actually quite enjoy playing it around half the time, when it isn't crashing, or far too easy, or the matchmaking puts you in a near unwinnable situation, or when there's no sound. For large parts of my 35 hours with Anthem, I was convinced I'd end up giving this game 2 stars out of 5, and the score is only heading down. I could easily make the case for that score, and this review will be slanted so negative that you will almost certainly think I should have stuck with the 2. But reviews aren't objective lists of positives and negatives. The list of negatives far outweighs the positives, but I want to play more Anthem. Even as I'm writing this, I want to dive in and plough through some more dumb enemies. That seems incompatible with a 2-star rating, so I find myself in the weird position of giving a game 3 stars when I think most of it is bad. I know not everyone cares about scores or even likes using them, but I put a lot of thought into them and believe they can still be useful, as long as they aren't too granular. I don't care what people say, there is sod all difference between a 7.7 and a 7.8. So here we are. Despite all its many flaws, I'm giving Anthem 3 stars out of 5. This is an odd situation for me. I think I'm going to end up at the high end of the review scores when it's usually the other way around. I might even come in higher than places like IGN, which is ironic because one of the reasons I started this channel was that I thought mainstream publications were far too generous with their review scores on big budget games. My rating does not constitute a recommendation. It's an incredibly tentative 3. A 3 with an asterisk if you like. A Barry Bonds 3. Ideally you'll watch the whole video to get the rest of my thoughts, but if you somehow have better things to do, then the summary advice is to wait at least a month for the worst bugs to be fixed. There's a lot of bugs, far more than can be fixed in time for Anthem's second release date. To borrow a phrase from the greatest wordsmith of our generation, Malcolm Tucker, I have a list of Anthem bugs longer than a fucking Leonard Cohen song. I'll talk about them later. If you do jump in, you should play on PC if at all possible because of the loading times. Keep an eye on Digital Foundry to check out loading times and other performance issues on consoles. And you should also play with a group of friends. I don't mean in that BS it's fun with friends thing that people always come out with. It's that the matchmaking is atrocious and you'll have a much better time if you play sessions with a decent squad. Anthem's combat can be exhilarating thanks to the abilities and their associated combos, plus the movement system. It took a while for this to click into place with me, but once it did I started having a great time. The high points in Anthem's moment-to-moment combat exceed that in the Destiny games and the Division. On that note, expect to hear a lot of comparisons to Destiny. Lots of people have played it and it's an easy comparison to make in many ways, although later on I'll argue that a comparison to Diablo 3 might be more apt. You choose between 4 different javelin types and gain access to the others as you level up. The 4 javelins offer vastly different playstyles. I chose an interceptor, a nimble javelin that has a triple jump and can chain 3 dodges, which combined lets you get out of most tricky situations. Interceptor is a lot of fun to play with and I highly recommend it. It could do with a bit of a buff to either shields, attacks or both, because it relies on getting in close to deal damage while not being strong enough to withstand many hits. On Grandmaster difficulties I found myself in the weird position of wanting to dive in to finish off combos, but not being able to because splash damage from the dead enemy would leave me on 1 HP, and obviously a second hit means I'm dead in the middle of a mob. I'd lean towards buffing shields for the Interceptor, but making the attack more powerful could at least add extra incentive and encourage you to take the risk. I also played a bit with Storm and Colossus. Think of Storm as a glass cannon mage hovering in the air and throwing down spells to weaken enemies for everyone else. This is the most visually appealing class from the start and a lot of people go for this one. Colossus is, as you might expect, the tank of the group. This one doesn't seem to be too popular, but it's a lot better than it looks once you get the hang of it, and you can really feel the heft of this thing as you throw it around, for better and for worse. There's also a Ranger, which I haven't personally played with. It's described as being average and doesn't sound at all appealing. To appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of each javelin type, you need to know a bit about the abilities and how the combo system works, because despite initial appearances, Anthem isn't really a shooter. Anthem is all about the abilities. Once I hit the Grandmaster difficulties in the endgame, I found myself strictly using guns as an afterthought or for dealing with a lone grunt that didn't deserve the full might of my power brought down on him, so I just took pity and blasted him in the face with a shotgun. Each javelin has 5 abilities, 2 attacking, 1 support, 1 ultimate, and the last one is a basic melee attack. The 2 attacking abilities are on incredibly short cooldowns, so you can use them a lot. You don't save these for special occasions. The abilities are either prime, detonate or neutral. If you prime an enemy and then detonate them, you will perform a combo which deals extra damage and comes complete with an incredibly satisfying noise when you do it. Yes, this is a cheap trick to get me hooked on playing. Yes, it absolutely works on me. You can also prime enemies for other players to detonate or detonate those primed by others. All characters can prime and detonate, but some are clearly better suited to one over the other. Storm is great for priming enemies from the air for an interceptor to go in and detonate with their melee attack or other abilities. Colossus is better suited to detonating and can absolutely wreck large groups. When you have a group of 4 players who vaguely know what they're doing, this system can be absolute chaos in the best possible way. Yes, the screen becomes a complete mess, but I loved it. A good Storm is an invaluable part of the team. With a Storm hovering in the air, priming all the enemies, an Interceptor can detonate them all in quick succession with a series of melee attacks. Technically you are just hammering the same button over and over again when you do this, but that's missing the point somewhat. You're executing a combo because either you've gone to the effort to prime the enemy first or a teammate has, so there's an inherent satisfaction in destroying swarms of enemies so easily. Here's where the first comparison to Diablo comes in. There's not much skill involved in Diablo either, but your power is a reward for having created a good build. That's kind of how I think of Anthem. And did I mention the ping? The lack of difficulty was a huge issue for me for most of my playthrough. Anthem is frankly embarrassingly easy, even on hard, which is the toughest difficulty setting until you hit the level cap. This can ruin the experience in a couple of ways. When you're at low level, you often get put with high level players, which means you barely even get a chance to let loose before the entire field is cleared by your teammates. There were plenty of missions where I felt like the younger sibling given a controller that wasn't plugged in. That was no fun. Eventually the opposite happened where I was the highly geared player who killed everyone. That was not much fun either. Then there were the laughable moments where big boss battles were introduced, only for the boss to be destroyed with absolutely no skill. There were multiple moments during the story, and even in the endgame, where dialogue would introduce the final baddie, such as an epic outlaw, or new enemy type such as a fury, and that enemy would be defeated before the guy on the radio had even finished one line introducing him. I never even saw the fury that first time. We all just hit it with a bunch of attacks, and there were so many special effects that I could barely make out the health bar. Again, just to emphasise, this was on the hardest difficulty setting available to me. Another ridiculous example occurred during one of the many defend the objective missions. We had to stay inside a small area for a signal to upload and fend off the big final wave. Lots of red dots appeared on the radar, so we all stood on the same spot, waited for them to appear in view and opened fire. They were gone in seconds and that was that. So much for the big battle. This is obviously unacceptable. Anthem desperately needs a difficulty above hard that you can play before hitting the level cap. The enemies were too easy to kill under any metric. However, even as I unlocked Grandmaster difficulty, I noticed something. I enjoyed being able to kill the mobs quickly and easily, within reason. Anthem is constantly compared to Destiny, however I had by far the most fun when it played like Diablo. I want to destroy multiple enemies with one explosion of colour. I don't want the grunts to put up any fight individually. I want the challenge to come from the sheer number of them and the occasional epic enemy or 5. Don't make me work to kill goons, make me work to kill 100 of them as quickly and impressively as possible. Providing an experience akin to Diablo instead of Destiny would also help hide one of Anthem's huge flaws, which is the almost complete lack of enemy AI. To say the enemies are as dumb as a box of rocks would be insulting to both boxes and rocks. They stand around doing very little until you get close, at which point they make a vague effort to fire in your direction. You can practically see the scripting working behind the scenes at times, such as when you get close enough to a hound to trigger it to charge at you and then move out of range so that it loses you, or when a group of enemies all wander aimlessly from location to location just because a player was there at one point previously. They make no attempt to look for you, they just go to the spot you were at, stand around and then move off all as a pack. I doubt many people care about the AI of mobs in Diablo though. They aren't there as a test of your military strategy. They are there to be on the receiving end of your power and drop loot. They're the necessary spark to kickstart your fireworks show, that's all. That's not to say it should never offer a challenge, it's just a different type of challenge. At its best, Anthem plays like Diablo, offering up tons of enemies for you to farm and you don't notice them standing around aimlessly because you can barely see them for all the colour, and half the time Storm has them frozen in place anyway. I'd love to see Anthem double down on this approach. Don't try and be a third-person Destiny, be a sci-fi Diablo instead. Unfortunately, I don't think Anthem is made for that, or at least it would require a substantial change to much of the game, which involves flying around a large open world. While I personally enjoy the dungeon areas, the game is largely built around flight in wide open spaces. You can't populate the entire world with enemies, which means the only chances to really do this are in the Stronghold missions, which are essentially dungeons or strikes if you like the Destiny terminology, because these missions take place largely underground in confined areas. At least this gives me some hope for future strongholds and cataclysms. Ironically, one of the moments that made me realise just how much I enjoyed Anthem's combat was during a bugged mission. I joined a mission halfway through with the goal of defeating Dominion troops who were spawning from two ends of a small arena. After 5 minutes it became clear they wouldn't stop spawning. Players started quitting out only to be replaced by more players who would then quit out once they realised the mission was bugged. Even though I knew it was pointless and the enemies weren't dropping any loot, I kept playing for over 20 minutes. I bounced around from spawn point to spawn point, dishing out combos and generally trying to show off I guess. It was fun to try and stay in the air as long as possible before diving down for a string of melee attacks and then zipping back up in the air again. There's no way I would have done this if I didn't enjoy the fundamental act of killing things in Anthem. I admit this was a bit of a one-off, but there's something special at the heart of Anthem when it's firing on all cylinders and it isn't beyond redemption. Please bear that in mind because the rest of this review is going to lean heavily negative. First up is the story. The best spin I can put on it is that by the standards of other looter shooters it's not that bad. Compared to RPGs in general it's flat out terrible, but that's not what kind of game this is. Bioware has cleared a low bar. At least Anthem makes its inspiration clear from the start. The prologue throws out so many generic terms that you know exactly what type of story you're going to get. Expectations are set. There's a MacGuffin called Anthem, you're a freelancer aided remotely by a cipher, there's a group of fighters called Sentinels, massive walking transports are called Striders, the big bad is called the Monitor who leads a group of enemies called the Dominion, the world is called Bastion, the Javelin that has a lot of elemental effects is called Storm, the big one is called Colossus. Nearly every noun feels like the initial placeholder word that was used during development that never got replaced later down the line. The Prologue Mission sees you, as a new freelancer, try to stop a cataclysm called the Heart of Rage. The mission goes horribly wrong. A major city is destroyed and most freelancers die during the failed attempt to stop the Heart of Rage. As a result, everyone now hates the freelancers for some reason, although this plays little part in the story and is barely noticeable. Lots of tell, little show. The Monitor is after the Anthem, which will give him all the power basically, and it's up to you to stop him. This requires finding a special Javelin suit and upgrading yours to travel into the Heart of Rage. The story is easily picked apart if you're so inclined, although I think it's so irrelevant that it doesn't even deserve that level of scrutiny. Bioware never effectively manages to deal with the issue of your character being front and centre while also working alongside 3 others, and the bad guy is so generic that he wouldn't even make it past the first draft of a script for a Marvel movie. And don't get me started on the terrible tomb quest. Once you're about halfway through the campaign, the entire thing comes to a grinding halt with one of the worst and most blatant examples of story padding I've seen. You have to access 4 tombs, but to do so you must complete a bunch of random and unrelated challenges, such as a certain number of melee kills, revives, chests opened, world events completed, etc. This took me hours to complete, although that was partly because it was bugged and didn't count progression early enough, and there's an issue with opening chests that I'll mention later. The campaign's pacing is wrecked, and it comes just as many people will be finishing their 10-hour trial period. Your progression log for these tomb challenges is also tucked away, so instead of just looking at the main campaign log, you have to go to the challenges section, then free play, and then select the mission. It's easily missed. And what epic event is waiting inside these tombs after all that time spent trying to open them? Nothing. You just walk in, grab an item, and walk back out again. Actually, let me correct that. You walk in, hit a load screen, grab an item, hit another load screen, and are then back out again. You do this 4 times. The writing is generally of low quality, especially in the main campaign, strangely enough. I enjoyed the relationship between Haluk and his cipher Faye, but most of the others were either dull or annoying. I never connected with the protagonist at all. She was annoyingly chipper the entire time. As you know, I'm an incredibly bright and cheery person myself, but this was on another level. You get to make a couple of 50-50 dialogue choices along the way, however they don't do much more than change the next line before the conversation goes back to the same place. It might have helped if we could have seen our character during those conversations. Despite being asked to choose an appearance at the start, you never see your character outside of his or her suit. The strongest writing is found in the lore entries and some of the side characters dotted around Fort Tarsus, such as the mother struggling to deal with the loss of her daughter. There's some incredible voice acting on display, but again it's not consistent. Rochelle Neal as Faye was excellent, and I'm a sucker for Catherine Tate, who unfortunately only has a minor role, and there's a lot of talent on board. Not all of it landed for me, possibly because the writing simply wasn't good enough. There are too many bad lines to choose from, but one that I keep hearing because it's part of a stronghold mission, which you end up repeating a lot in the endgame, is the old, "Why is there a door for a cave? To keep us out, or to keep something in?" Ugh. Overall, it's a huge missed opportunity because Bioware has actually created an interesting world here, it's just you have to look into the lore entries to see it. Regular viewers will know that I despise bad stories being excused with "but it's in the lore" nonsense. Lore should support a story, not be the story. It's also usually not very good and is held to a ridiculously low standard. The vast majority of Destiny lore entries are a load of trite and don't stand up to any scrutiny. Only 5 people in the world understand Destiny's story, and I'm pretty sure none of them work at Bungie. Bioware has done a far better job creating Anthem's world, largely by keeping events focused on one region. You can read a coherent history of events, and I get the impression Bioware put a lot of thought into this. Possibly more so than any other part of the game. None of this excuses a bad story, in fact it makes the bad story even more regrettable because it's a waste of such fantastic potential. The bad story is disappointing, but games such as Anthem don't generally live or die by their stories. The story isn't going to be what kills Anthem before it even gets going, it's the myriad of other terrible design decisions Bioware made that often don't have an easy solution. This is where I really start to lay into Anthem because so many of these problems are inexcusable. They're obviously bad. They should never have made it into the game in the first place and show a worrying lack of judgment on the part of Bioware and misplaced priorities. More than the bugs, it's the following issues that have me worried for Anthem's future. Mission structure is flat out terrible. You go to a location, scan something, hold the fort while enemies attack, go to a new location and repeat. Even that simple structure is poorly executed. There's always a huge delay in getting mission updates as if the message is being relayed by the US Postal Service. You do a lot of flying between locations, and despite the excellent flight controls, there's no aerial combat. Even a basic mission to chase down an airborne enemy would add to the tedium of travelling between locations. Early on this wasn't a problem because the world is so gorgeous. It's one of the best I've ever seen in terms of straight up graphical fidelity. Weather conditions such as electrical storms look great and flocks of birds will fly in front of you as you travel. There are small towns and interesting ruins to stare at as you fly past. However, this novelty wears off after a while, although the feeling of kicking your boosters into gear never does. Occasionally you have to grab echoes floating around during combat arenas, but that's about the only time your ability to fly is put to good use in tense situations. Otherwise you just use it to travel from place to place. It's such a shame that Anthem never makes interesting use of one of its strongest features. And then there's Fort Tarsus, the small town you visit between missions. It looks incredible, almost too good to be true, and that's the problem. Instead of making a hub for players to gather in large groups between missions, Bioware prioritised making the best looking hub it could, and in the process not only sacrificed the ability to mingle with other players, it made it so excruciatingly slow and such a chore to experience that I've asked my wife to take over the process for me. In turn I do all the washing up, and I consider that a win. It's absolutely baffling to me that this made it into the final product beyond it just being a sunk cost and it was too late to back out. And look, to be fair, there are some nice touches, such as parts of the fort getting cleaned as you improve your reputation with the various alliances, but this is nowhere near enough to make all the suffering worth it. There's an attempt to rectify the situation with a small hub area called the launch bay, which you share with a couple of other players. This is it. This room here. It's absolutely pitiful and a box ticking exercise if ever I've seen one. From here you can access your vault, start missions, return to Fort Tarsus and check out your gear. And let's talk about that gear screen briefly. First of all, you need to access it via these specific locations. You can't just pull it up out of nowhere. And there's a loading screen beforehand, although this was mercifully short for me at least. That's just the beginning of its problems. There's no stats page. Despite having plenty of weapons and abilities that provide buffs to everything from ammo counts to electrical resistance, there is no way to keep track of the cumulative effect of your stats. This is absolutely mind-boggling and again makes you question whether Bioware knew what kind of game it was making. I'm putting this one down to sheer incompetence because there's evidence elsewhere which really shows Bioware doesn't understand its own systems. For a start, many of the inscriptions on weapons and abilities don't appear to work. I noticed this myself for the ones I was able to verify, such as boosts to ammo counts, and I've seen enough other complaints to maybe think this isn't a one-off bug. Then there's the general random nature of the inscriptions. There's no way any thought went into this. You can get inscriptions that are completely useless for the class you're playing, such as a bonus for the pistol and a Colossus perk. The Colossus can't use a pistol. Most guns come with random buffs to other gun types, which I guess could make for some interesting pairings, but I'd hate to have to farm for not only a specific weapon, but a specific weapon that buffs another weapon class. And the wording for passive abilities, known as components, is especially atrocious. My Interceptor has one that says it provides an additional 35% damage dealt and an extra minus 35% to damage received. I think it's trying to say you'll receive an extra 35% damage, but that's not what it currently says. There are plenty of examples of Bioware simply not understanding how percentages work. This sort of stuff is absolutely crucial in a loot game. Also, if you ever wonder why your teammates aren't great at using combos, then you can probably blame this screen right here. Primes and detonators are supposed to have a little logo to identify which is which, except the detonators are not marked for the interceptors. When you're choosing your loadout, you won't know if something's a detonator until you're out in the field, and since you can't change it on the fly, you're kind of screwed. Interceptors have moves referred to as strikes. That certainly sounds like a detonator type move, and indeed one strike is a detonator. That led me to assume the other was as well, however it's actually not for some reason. Anthem does a terrible job explaining its systems. You have to go hunting in menus to properly understand combos at all, and there are loads of terms like aura that are barely explained or used in contradictory ways. In time this will be solved by wikis, but that shouldn't be necessary here. It's not that complicated a game. Terms like shields and armour seem to be used interchangeably as well. The list really could go on. Bioware has somehow made a loot game where you can't check your character's stats, and the explanations of said stats are either confusing or flat out wrong. How you don't make this a priority in a loot game is absolutely beyond me. As if that isn't bad enough, Bioware also forgot to make the loot interesting. Guns in particular are a miserable selection of 2 or 3 of each type, so you'll probably just keep levelling up your favourites to slowly increase a number with little change in accompanying playstyle. Masterwork and legendary guns are decent, but the inscriptions are so extreme that 2 guns can be of the same power level, but one can be multiple times stronger than the other. You can re-roll, however that's incredibly expensive at the moment. To be fair, at this point you're more levelling up for gear synergies than you are particular weapon types, and this can result in some fun and powerful builds. My gut feeling is that this is far too time consuming to do right now, but that's a problem that can be fixed and is at least slightly more understandable. Another worrying problem is that despite Bioware constantly talking about how Anthem is best played in a group and not meant to be experienced solo, Bioware has made a complete mess of the multiplayer. It feels like an afterthought. Remember the days when suddenly all games had to have a multiplayer of some kind because publishers were scared of second-hand sales? We got a bunch of terrible multiplayer modes often farmed out to other studios and they were rarely worth playing. It feels like something similar has happened here, except this is actually an online multiplayer game where the multiplayer is an afterthought. There are small issues such as the lack of text chat, but it's balancing and overall matchmaking that can ruin the experience. I've already discussed how this can be an issue during the main campaign, but it continues on into the endgame as well. After hitting level 30 and spending some time getting my power level well above 400, I decided to check out a stronghold on hard difficulty. These strongholds are tougher than the rest of the content, so it's wise to play a bit on hard first to get some masterwork weapons before going into the Grandmaster difficulties. During one such run we were having a terrible time. I'm not going to show footage of this on screen because it wasn't the fault of the other players at all. I got knocked down a few times, as tends to happen with interceptors, but I couldn't believe how long it was taking teammates to resurrect me. I'm not exaggerating when I say that in just one part of the stronghold I spent 15 whole minutes staring at this screen. That's another problem, by the way. When you're knocked down you can't crawl to safety or even access the menu to quit. You either sit here staring at the screen or you alt F4 out of it. Anyway, it was fairly annoying because I'd resurrected them plenty of times already by this point. To be fair, they were clearly trying to get to me, but every enemy represented a major challenge for them. This seemed odd because for the most part I'd been ploughing through groups of them. Eventually, and I mean nearly 90 minutes later, we take down the boss. I check the footage back and can't find a single notable instance of the other three doing any damage to the final boss whatsoever. Let me tell you, I have never worked so hard in my entire life during a mission. I was sweating by the end of this. A number of times all three teammates were down and I was low on health, having to waste my ult to get health back and res them. I finally knew how other players must feel with me on the team in, well, any other competitive game. I'm sorry guys, I'm so sorry. Something was clearly wrong if I'm carrying a team, and a quick glance at the end screen proved it. Not only were those players not level 30, they weren't even close. 2 were level 21 and 1 was level 9. That is absolutely insane and one of the worst examples of matchmaking I've ever seen. The enemies must have been scaled to my level, or at least close to it, because the others were barely able to do chip damage to low level grunts. Interestingly, health didn't seem a big issue. While they did die a lot, so did I, which leads me to believe that health or damage received might be scaled for your level even though damage dealt isn't. Alternatively, this could be the result of health being largely meaningless, with the interceptor at least. I can never be killed with one shot, but nearly every hit would take me down to 1 HP. The problems with matchmaking go even deeper because there's no effort to match classes either, and this can make or break the enjoyment I have on any given mission. Playing with a dedicated group, or at least getting matched into a decent one, can completely change the experience, so it's crazy that I regularly found myself matched up with 2 other interceptors and a ranger, or 3 storms. This isn't something Bioware can easily fix because some classes are more popular than others, but it doesn't change the fact that the right mix-up of classes makes a huge difference. It would also help if we could change our abilities while out in the field. That way, if I find myself in a group and we're short of, say, detonator abilities, I can equip a couple of mine, or vice versa. Other problems are not quite so significant, however, they once again show Bioware's general lack of competence with the type of game it made. Bioware has clearly copied a lot of features from similar games without understanding them. Take world events, for example. These pop up at random on a map, with the idea being that you go in and kill waves of enemies alongside a bunch of other people in the same instance. They're like Destiny's public events, except they don't work at all here, because instead of taking place on a small map with a lot of people, they take place on a huge map with only 4 people. The chances of you all being in the same place at the same time are remote, and as such you'll end up doing most of them by yourself. Then there are the daily, weekly and monthly challenges, which are literally just called dailies, weeklies and monthlies. You can check them out in the 4, except it only shows you 1. If you dive into some submenus you'll find there are actually loads of them available. Then there's the map. It's a typical modern Bioware map, which means it shows a basic overview of the topography and, to again quote Malcolm Tucker, is about as much use as a marzipan dildo. Oh, and you can't add waypoints to the maps. Again, you have to wonder how on earth the game ships with that missing. Finally, I should warn you about the load screens. Yeah, there's a lot of them. I can understand the load before booting into the world, but most of the others scream of a lack of optimization or just decent forethought. For example, there's a mission where you must pass through a load screen and into a small cave, only to find that the door you need to pass through is locked. So you head back outside, which of course necessitates another load screen 30 seconds after the last one. This is absolutely absurd. Why isn't this small cave loaded in as part of the main world? If you need another load screen for the section after this, put it at the door which you eventually unlock. Or hell, have that locked door be out in the open world. Anything that avoids 2 unnecessary load screens. I'm sure Bioware tried to cut the load times down as much as possible, so let's assume it's all necessary. Even then, there are things Bioware could have done to help the situation, like not having such a strict tethering system. If you so much as fall a few seconds behind your team, you'll be warned that you need to catch up and given a countdown timer. Typically this is 24 seconds, but sometimes it's a lot less if a certain event is triggered. If you don't catch up in time, you'll be booted to a load screen before returning to the game. This nearly always takes longer than the few seconds it would take to just catch up to the action. By the way, when I say falling behind the team, I mean falling behind the person out in front. You can be in second place in a close group of 4 and still get the warning. It pops up all the time. When your game already struggles with load times, why would you exasperate the situation in this way? You can join missions already in progress through the quick play system, which essentially lets you fill in for players who drop out mid-quest. Sounds good. So you boot into quick play and after a load screen are dropped in miles from the action. You try to catch up, but 24 seconds isn't enough, so guess what? You hit another load screen. Worst of all, when the tethering system could actually be useful, it doesn't work. There's a section in one of the strongholds where you need to swim through water to reach a door. Your entire team has to be at the door for it to open, however people often get lost in the water, so you end up just standing there waiting for them. This is where the tethering should pull them in, but it doesn't. It's such a bizarre system, and I cannot for the life of me understand why it was designed this way. Maybe it's not supposed to work like this and it's just a bug. It's honestly so hard to tell what's a bug and what's just bad design. Speaking of which, let me go through the bugs quickly, because trust me, I had nearly all the bugs. Most of these will be patched and some have already, so I'm discussing these more to give an idea of how rushed out Anthem was and to encourage you to wait before buying. For starters, there's the usual wealth of connection problems and lag issues that you expect from online games near to release. It is what it is. I can't be bothered to get angry about it. It's almost comical at times though. Once I lagged out, which dropped me behind my team, which in turn meant the tethering system kicked in and booted me to a load screen. I had to quit the game 9 times due to the sound completely cutting out. There were numerous soft locks and crashes to the desktop. It'll get fixed at some point, I suppose. Missions will also break on a regular basis, especially if you booted in via quick play. There was often no objective marker, so you just fly around for a bit with other people who are just as lost as you and then give up. Once we all got stuck in a room because the barrier keeping us in didn't disappear after we completed the mission. One of the most annoying bugs was when I got locked out of the final boss room on a series of missions I'd been working towards for hours and missed the resolution. I'd been barely a second behind my team, but the barrier shut in my face. Another time this happened, I was able to travel far enough in the opposite direction to trigger the tethering system, which put me into the boss room just as it was all over. I mentioned earlier that you never see your character after choosing their look. This wasn't technically true for me. I saw the inside of her face when the camera bugged out during an important cutscene. Then there are the chests that you have to unlock during that terrible story mission. Turns out it only counts the chest if you open it yourself. If a teammate gets to it first, you still get the loot as intended, but it doesn't count towards the total opened. The compass would even show nearby chests that had already been opened. Again, this stuff will get fixed, and I think the last one already has. I believe the day 1 patch, that isn't a day 1 patch at all actually, and fuck you for calling it that, will resolve the issue, but the important thing is how such basic BS can make it into the game at all. This is a main mission. A bad one, but it is still mandatory. The fact that a main quest is bugged in such a major way makes me think it was added in late as padding. I've saved the best one for last. The bug that bothers me most of all is the one in the launch bay. This is the zone where you can mingle with a couple of other players. This bug is annoying because it shows Bioware not learning lessons from the mistakes of others. Here's what happens. There are 2 exits, one at either end. The only way you can leave this room short of booting back to the menu is by one of these 2 doors. The slight problem is that if someone blocks the door you can't interact with it. Not a huge deal of course, I mean no one is going to stand there for long are they? Oh no way, of course they are, because it's the internet, and so you can guarantee that 2 sad losers will stand at either door and stop people getting out. Honestly, it's kind of as funny as it is depressing, but given that The Division had a similar high profile issue, you think Bioware would have worked around stuff like this. Throughout my time with Anthem, I continue to be amazed at how little Bioware learned from the mistakes others have already made. Anthem isn't releasing in a vacuum. It's competing against Destiny 2 and soon The Division 2. It can't afford to make such basic errors. And there's plenty I haven't mentioned. The UI is awful. Enemies like the Titan are boring as hell to fight. You often can't tell what hit you and there are far too many AoE attacks with balked hitboxes. Flight is weirdly restricted, so you have to keep landing every now and again for like 2 seconds at a time. It's pointless. But I have to start with a list of complaints somewhere. Before wrapping up, I want to talk about the in-game currencies and microtransactions briefly. I always find this tough to discuss in reviews. As mentioned, I can't stand the entire system, especially loot boxes. However, just because I dislike the system doesn't mean it necessarily affects my enjoyment of a game. If microtransactions can only get you cosmetics, then I just don't care because I'm not that bothered by how my character looks, especially since there is a lot of flexibility when it comes to personalising your javelin. At the moment, an epic skin will set you back around $8, but given that there will likely be higher levels of cosmetic gear added later on, you should expect the price to reach at least $10. I think that's extortionate, especially when you look at the price of the game, which is already taking the piss by asking for $60 when it's in this state. But then what is one suit worth if you compare it to the price of the game itself? I mean, I'd say $1 is too much, but clearly I'm in the minority. You can buy stuff with in-game currency as well. I had around 120,000 gold when I hit the level cap. With a bit more work I'll be able to buy 2 of the cosmetic suits, although it's worth noting that the earn rate of gold slows down a lot later in the game, plus you can use gold for crafting materials, so if you spend it on cosmetics you'll have less to spend elsewhere. As it stands, you can't use the paid currency to buy any competitive advantage. In short, don't expect to be able to buy all or even the majority of the fancy stuff on offer without forking over real money. And to be honest, you shouldn't fork over real money for Anthem at all, not yet anyway. I managed to salvage some enjoyment from Anthem, and yes, I do think it has some potential, but in no way can I recommend you buy in yet. I almost forgot to mention the endgame content, and that's because Bioware almost forgot to add any in. The endgame is repeating 3 stronghold missions again and again. One of these strongholds is a mission you probably did earlier in the game, and another is literally the final mission, so really there's only one piece of brand new endgame content. It's ridiculous. More is coming, of course, because that's the way things work now, but you should wait for the endgame to get padded out before investing your time and money. I don't really like the fact that I'm giving Anthem 3 stars out of 5, because in my head I feel like it deserves a lower score and I want to punish the appalling state it released in. But it would be dishonest to ignore the fun I had with it. I can't advocate for anyone else taking the risk unless they don't care about the $60 or potential lost time. It's crazy that Bioware did the hard part so well and created a system of combat and movement that I absolutely love, while failing nearly everywhere else. Hopefully Anthem can be fixed, and with any luck Bioware will look to Diablo 3 for inspiration, not Destiny, because that's where the true potential lies. Okay, that's it from me today. If you enjoyed the review, please consider going through the like, share, subscribe routine. If you'd like to support the channel financially and get your name in the credits, then please consider donating $1 a month to my Patreon, which also gets you a Patreon role in my Discord server. I owe you all a review of Crosscode, plus there should be big videos on Metro Exodus and Mass Effect 3 coming in the next month, plus a bunch of smaller reviews. Until next time, cheers.